I found out my girlfriend was cheating during our Europe trip and let her pay before breaking up. It was supposed to be the perfect getaway, a dream vacation across Europe with the woman I loved. From the cobblestone streets of Paris to the scenic views of Rome, everything seemed like a fairy tale. We had been together for over a year, building memories, laughing, and planning a future. Little did I know, that trip would become the turning point of my life. The moment I would find out that the woman I trusted more than anyone was not who I thought she was. I discovered my girlfriend's betrayal in the most unexpected of places. It was during our stay in a quiet, charming hotel in Amsterdam, of all places, that the truth came crashing down on me. And when I found out, I didn't rush to confront her. No, I let her enjoy the vacation. I let her think everything was fine. But deep down, I knew what I had to do. The way she would pay for her actions was something no one would see coming. Stay with me until the end to find out how everything unfolded. We met at a mutual friend's party one chilly evening. Her name was Jessica, and she had this magnetic energy about her. It was impossible not to be drawn to her. We spent the night talking, laughing, and discovering how many things we had in common. It didn't take long before we started dating, and soon after, our connection deepened. I truly thought I had found someone special, someone I could grow old with. Jessica was beautiful, ambitious, and caring. At least, that's what I believed. Our relationship moved quickly, but I was comfortable with it. After several months of dating, we decided to take a big step together, a vacation across Europe. We spent months planning the trip, picking out the perfect cities to visit, the landmarks to see, and the experiences we'd share. We wanted to make memories that would last a lifetime. I was excited to not only experience Europe for the first time but to do so with someone I cared for so deeply. As the days passed and we explored breathtaking views, something began to feel off. At first, it was subtle. Jessica seemed distracted, checking her phone a bit more than usual, avoiding eye contact during conversations, or letting long silences pass by when we were together. I brushed it off as the stress of traveling or perhaps fatigue from sightseeing. But deep down, I had this nagging feeling, a gut instinct that something was wrong. It wasn't until we were in Amsterdam at the hotel we were staying at that everything came to a head. The unease I had been feeling for days finally made sense, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. I stumbled upon something I wasn't meant to see, a message on her phone. It was brief, but it was enough. Enough to shatter everything I had believed to be true about our relationship. She had been seeing someone else behind my back, and from what I could gather, it had been going on for weeks. I was crushed, betrayed. But I wasn't about to confront her right away. No, I had other plans. I knew I would have to make her pay for what she had done, but not in the way most people would expect. Jessica and I had always gotten along well. We shared the same interests, values, and goals. We would talk for hours about our future, our dreams of traveling together, and the life we wanted to build. She seemed genuinely invested in our relationship. I thought everything was perfect. I had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. However, the signs were all there. Looking back, I could see how blind I had been. She would cancel plans last minute, making up excuses that didn't quite add up. When we were together, her attention would be divided, constantly checking her phone, texting, or scrolling through social media. But I trusted her. I trusted her more than I had trusted anyone before. Our trip to Europe was meant to be a celebration of our love. I had imagined romantic evenings in Paris, walks along the canals in Venice, and cozy dinners in the heart of Florence. We had been through some tough times, but I thought this vacation would strengthen our bond. Little did I know, it would be the trip that opened my eyes to the lies she had been hiding. What made it even more painful was how much I had invested emotionally in our relationship. I had introduced her to my friends and family, built a life together, and even talked about marriage. She had become my world, and the thought of losing her never crossed my mind. I had always believed in loyalty and honesty, and I thought she shared those values with me. But all of that came crashing down with a single text message. It was a typical evening during our trip to Amsterdam. We had returned to the hotel after a long day of sightseeing. The excitement of exploring the city was still fresh in my mind, but something was different. Jessica seemed more distant than usual. She excused herself to freshen up and left her phone on the bedside table. Normally, I would have respected her privacy, but that gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach couldn't be ignored. I had to know. At first, I told myself I was overreacting. I tried to shake off the thought, but curiosity got the better of me. The moment I picked up her phone, my hands were shaking, and I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. But I knew that if there was even a chance that something wasn't right, I needed to find out. Her phone was unlocked, and I began scrolling through her messages. It was then that I found it. A single message, short but powerful, from someone named Tom. The message read, "I can't stop thinking about you. When are we going to meet again?" I felt my heart stop. I stared at the screen for a few moments, unsure of what I was seeing. The world around me blurred as my thoughts raced. How long had this been going on? Who was this Tom? Was this a one-time mistake, or had it been happening behind my back for months? I scrolled through more messages, each one confirming my worst fears. They were more than just casual conversations. There was an emotional connection, one that I had never been a part of. They had shared intimate details, laughed about private jokes, and even made plans to meet up during our trip. Each message left a bitter taste in my mouth, but I couldn't stop reading. I had to know everything. As the messages unfolded, I found out that Jessica had been seeing this guy for almost as long as we had been dating. The affair had started innocently enough, just a few texts here and there, but over time, it had become something much deeper. They had met up several times, including during our trip to Europe. I couldn't believe what I was reading. All the signs I had ignored now seemed so obvious. I was furious, betrayed, and yet I still couldn't bring myself to confront her right away. Instead, I carefully put her phone back on the table, pretending I had never seen anything. I felt a storm brewing inside me, but I needed to be calm. I couldn't make any rash decisions. Not yet. The next day, I woke up early and decided to go for a walk on my own. I needed time to process everything I had discovered. I walked through the quiet streets of Amsterdam, reflecting on our relationship, the trust one had given her, and the lies she had told me. I had spent so much energy investing in someone who, in reality, had been living a double life. It hurt more than I ever thought possible. When I returned to the hotel, Jessica was already awake. She seemed as if nothing was wrong. She smiled and asked how my walk had been, but I couldn't look her in the eye. The anger inside me was slowly turning into something else, cold, calculated resolve. I knew then that I wasn't going to let this go easily. She had lied to me, cheated on me, and ruined something I had cherished. But I also realized that I wasn't going to let her get away with it without facing the consequences. The plan was clear now. I wasn't going to confront her immediately, nor would I break up with her in the heat of the moment. I had learned that sometimes it was better to let someone think everything was fine, only to reveal the truth when they least expected it. I needed to wait for the right moment, one where I could get the ultimate satisfaction of watching her face the consequences of her actions. For the rest of our trip, I kept up the facade. We continued to tour the cities, but the connection between us had vanished. Every smile, every touch felt hollow. It was as if we were both actors in a play, pretending for the sake of the show. I could see her struggling to understand why I had become distant. But in the back of my mind, I knew I had to stay composed. I couldn't let her know that I knew. I began to think about how I would get my revenge. It wasn't just about confronting her, it was about making her realize the pain she had caused. It was about making sure she understood that what she had done to me had consequences beyond just a broken heart. And as I walked through the cobblestone streets of Venice later in the trip, I felt more certain of my plan. It was on the final night of our trip in the romantic city of Paris, when everything finally came to a head. The atmosphere in the hotel room was tense. The once light-hearted conversations between us were now replaced with an unsettling silence. Jessica had been acting increasingly strange, as if she could sense that something was off, but she had no idea that I knew the truth. I had become a master at hiding my emotions, at playing the role of the oblivious boyfriend while secretly plotting my next move. That night, as we sat down for dinner in a small Parisian restaurant, I could no longer hold back the truth. I watched her talk about the day's events, her face bright and full of excitement. I could hear the sound of her voice, but all I could think about was the betrayal, the lies, and the infidelity. She had no idea what I was about to do, and in that moment, I realized that the power was in my hands. With every bite of food, I felt the anger inside me building. I couldn't keep up the charade much longer. I knew the time had come. Finally, after she mentioned something trivial about a tourist spot we had visited earlier that day, I spoke. "Do you ever feel guilty?" I asked, my voice calm but full of underlying tension. Her face softened in confusion. "What do you mean?" she replied, looking at me with those eyes that once held so much trust. I took a deep breath, letting the words sink in. "Do you ever feel guilty about what you did to me?" The words slipped out like poison, each one more bitter than the last. I could see her freeze, her body tense, the confusion on her face turning to realization. She stuttered, not knowing how to respond. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone, the one thing I had been holding onto for the past several days. I scrolled through the messages between her and Tom. I could see the shock and panic in her eyes as she began to piece it together. The color drained from her face as she reached for the phone, but I pulled it away. You really thought I wouldn't find out? I said coldly. I've known for days. The silence in the restaurant was deafening. For a moment, she just stared at me, unsure of how to react. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I had finally caught her in the act, and I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on both of us. The guilt, the shame, the regret, it all came rushing to the surface. She had nothing to say in her defense. She knew what she had done, and in that moment, I could see her struggling to come to terms with it. But no apology would be enough. You really thought you could get away with it? I asked again, my voice colder now. You thought I wouldn't find out, that I wouldn't piece everything together? Her face flushed with embarrassment, but I didn't care. She had taken something from me that I could never get back, and now it was time for her to feel the full force of the consequences. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, she began, her voice trembling. But I was already done listening. The words she had spoken, the excuses, they meant nothing now. They could never take away the hurt I felt, the way she had shattered my trust and manipulated me into thinking everything was fine. You didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. And now you're going to pay for it? The words hung in the air like a thick fog, and for the first time in days, I felt a sense of relief. The truth had finally come out, and now it was time to take control. I've been planning this, Jessica, I continued. I knew everything, and I've been watching you this entire time. You thought I didn't know, but I knew. And now it's time for you to face the consequences. I could see her trying to hold back tears, but it was too late for that. She had crossed a line, and there was no coming back from it. The reality of the situation began to sink in. I was no longer the man who had been blindsided by love. I was the man who had taken his power back, who had reclaimed control over his life. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this without feeling the full weight of her actions. I'm done, Jessica, I said, standing up from the table. We're done. She reached out to grab my hand, but I pulled it away. There was no more connection between us, no more love, no more trust. She had burned those bridges long ago. With one final look at her, I left the restaurant. I could hear her calling after me, but I didn't turn back. It was over. As I walked through the quiet streets of Paris that night, I felt free. The weight that had been on my chest for so long had lifted. I had taken my power back, and nothing she said or did could ever change that. I knew there was still much to come, but for the first time in days, I felt at peace. The days following our confrontation in Paris were a blur. I left the city, returned to my apartment, and found myself alone with my thoughts. The silence in my place was deafening. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, the haunting realization that the person I had trusted most had torn apart everything I had built with her. But amidst the overwhelming sadness and anger, there was also a sense of clarity. I had faced the truth, and in doing so, I had finally taken control of my life. It was over. And I knew that the path ahead would not be easy, but it would be mine to walk. The first thing I did was hire a lawyer. I had already been in contact with one before the trip, and now I was ready to take the next step. I wasn't going to let her get away with what she had done. I had given her so much of myself, and she had shattered it all with a single decision. It was time for her to pay the price for her actions. As the divorce process began, I couldn't help but reflect on everything we had been through. There had been good times, of course, moments of happiness and love, but they were overshadowed by the lies and deceit. I couldn't ignore the fact that I had allowed myself to be blind to the red flags, that I had trusted her without question. I had spent so long trying to make things work, thinking that love would somehow fix everything, but I had been wrong. It wasn't love that had kept us together. It was my own unwillingness to face the truth. And then there was the revenge. It wasn't about getting back at her for the sake of vengeance. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my self-worth. I had been betrayed, and now I was going to take back what was mine. I had already cut ties with her emotionally, but there was more to do. I needed to make sure she felt the consequences of her actions in a way that would be impossible for her to ignore. I focused on the legal aspects of the divorce first. There were assets to divide, and I made sure that I wasn't going to walk away with nothing. I had worked hard for everything I had, and I wasn't going to let her take any part of it. The lawyer assured me that I had a strong case, that the infidelity would weigh heavily in my favor. Still, I remained vigilant, making sure everything was in order. I wasn't going to leave anything to chance. Meanwhile, Jessica's attempts to contact me grew more frequent. At first, she sent text messages, pleading for forgiveness, for a chance to explain herself. I ignored them all. Then came the phone calls, each one more desperate than the last. But I was resolute. There was nothing she could say that would change what had happened, nothing she could do to take back the pain she had caused. I knew she was trying to manipulate me, playing the victim, but I wasn't buying it. The woman I had loved was gone. All that was left was the wreckage of our relationship. And then there was Tom. As much as I had tried to focus solely on Jessica, I couldn't ignore the fact that he had been the one who had betrayed me as well. I hadn't yet decided what I was going to do about him, but I knew he couldn't escape the consequences either. He had been just as complicit in this mess as she had. And I had made a mental note that I wasn't going to let him off easy. In the midst of everything, I received a message from her, an apology, but not a heartfelt one. It was a calculated message, a last-ditch effort to salvage something from the wreckage. "I'm sorry, I know I hurt you. Please let's talk. We can fix this." The message was laced with guilt and regret, but it only fueled my resolve to continue on the path I had chosen. There was no fixing this. Not anymore. The person I had thought I knew was long gone, and the woman who had been in front of me was nothing more than a stranger. When the divorce papers were finally signed, and everything was finalized, I felt a sense of finality wash over me. The chapter with Jessica was closed, and I could finally breathe without the weight of betrayal on my shoulders. But even as the divorce was finalized, there was a lingering sense of satisfaction in knowing that I had come out on top, that I had taken control of my own fate. I didn't get back at her in any dramatic way, nor did I seek revenge in the way most people might expect. Instead, I focused on myself. I rebuilt my life, focusing on healing and self-improvement. I took up new hobbies, started traveling again, and found joy in the things that had once brought me peace. I surrounded myself with friends and family who supported me, and I began to reclaim the life I had lost in the years that I had spent in a relationship built on lies. As for Jessica, she tried to move on, but it was clear that her life wasn't going as smoothly as she had hoped. I heard through mutual friends that she had been struggling with the fallout from the affair, that Tom had moved on and was no longer interested in continuing their relationship. It seemed that her own choices had caught up with her in ways she hadn't anticipated. And as for me, I was free. Free from the lies, free from the pain, and free from the person who had torn my heart apart. I had learned valuable lessons from everything that had happened. I had learned to trust my instincts, to never settle for less than I deserved, and most importantly, to never allow someone else to control my happiness. In the end, I realized that the ultimate revenge wasn't about getting back at her, it was about taking back my life and creating a future where I was in control. I had let go of the anger, the resentment, and the pain. And with that, I was finally able to move on. If you found this story intriguing, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and press the bell icon so you never miss a new story.